I'm going to talk about housing, but I'm actually really talking about babies because I think they're actually at the center of a lot of some of the changes that we've seen in Southern Ontario over the last decade or so. That we've seen high home prices, higher rents. We've seen migration from one community to another. So there's been a lot of changes, and I think we often know the what, but the why can be a little bit more mysterious. So let's talk about babies, but we'll actually go back not just 10 years, but we'll go back to the 1960s. If you were a child born in Southern Ontario in the 1960s, and it could be a large city, it could be in a smaller community, what have you, there were a bunch of these kids that had a certain life trajectory. They were born in the 60s, they grew up, graduated from high school, went to college or university, wherever in Ontario. And then they got their first job, and their first job was in somewhere in the city of Toronto, downtown Toronto. So they moved there. And those kids born in the 60s, probably get an apartment downtown Toronto in the 1980s. They meet someone, they have a relationship, and they decide to have a family with kids. And they recognize, they're like, hey, you know what? I probably don't want to raise a child in an apartment in downtown Toronto for one reason or another. It's like, this is not what we want to do. So they decide they want somewhere with more space, usually 3 bedrooms, backyard, a porch. You can imagine what their needs are. So what they do is they go and they move. And they move, back in the early 1990s, when these folks are about 30, they move to a place like North York. They move to Etobicoke, maybe they move to Scarborough. Communities that are now part of the city of Toronto, but back then were kind of independent places. Now let's fast forward to the kids born in the 1970s, the babies born in the 1970s, which would be me. And I can think of the folks that I went to high school with. A bunch of us, same thing, we went to high school, graduated, went to college or university. And then when we graduated in the late 1990s, a lot of us wound up moving to the city of Toronto. Back then, it was kind of the same as it was for the 60s, because I think more of us maybe had condos, fewer of us had rentals, but we're all kind of living in high rises in downtown Toronto. And again, not everybody born in Southern Ontario, but just enough to kind of mess with the demographics and have an effect on the economy. So those folks, same thing. They get in their late 20s, early 30s, and they go, you know what, we want to have a kid, we want a little bit more space. But the challenge is, by that point, North York had gotten expensive. Etobicoke had gotten expensive, right? That just the city had grown, the economy had changed, the population had grown. They were kind of priced out of these communities. But fortunately, they could go to a Mississauga or a Brampton, or maybe they go out to Pickering, they go east. And they move there. They kind of drive until you qualify. There's this term, drive until you qualify, which basically means you want to qualify for a home. You get in the car and you drive as far away as you need to go in order to qualify. So those drive until you qualify families, they're still relatively close to the city of Toronto, right? They're in your Mississaugas, your Bramptons, your Pickerings, and so on. 80s kids, babies born in the 1980s, they're starting to come online, late 2000, maybe 2010, 2011, 2012. Home prices in Toronto have gotten even more expensive, but this, for them, a lot of the sort of same life trajectory. Graduate from high school, go to college, go to university, they get a job in Toronto. But now, when they start thinking about making that move, Mississauga's gotten expensive. All of Peel region's got expensive. York region's got expensive. So now they're going out to Hamilton. They're going out to Oshawa. They're going further out. So instead of being a 20, 30-minute commute away, maybe they're a 45, 50-minute commute. If they're lucky, they can take GO. If they're not lucky, they drive to the city. That model really starts to break down for the kids born in the early 90s. The kids born around 1993, 1994, things start to break down because by about 2016, the city of Toronto and the GTA had gotten very, very expensive because of population growth around difficulties of creating housing. Now, some of them, again, they go through high school, they go through college, they go to their first job. Fewer of them move to Toronto. They still do, many of them still do, some with help from parents, but those Toronto job offers don't look nearly as attractive as when you're paying $2,000 a month in rent rather than my cohort who might have been paying about $600. But a bunch of them still do it. Fewer than before, smaller portion before, but they still do it. Challenges then for that cohort, first of all, they have trouble saving up for a down payment to actually be a drive till you qualify family. And they, many of them forego having kids, but the ones that do have kids, and many of them still have kids, they're driving a lot further. They're driving a lot further now because Hamilton's got too expensive. Oshawa's got too expensive. So you're seeing this migration, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, out to places like Brantford, to places like Stratford. Smaller communities that haven't gotten all that expensive yet. They're still expensive, but haven't quite reached Mississauga level of being priced out, but they're much further away. They tend to be smaller communities and much further away. You'll note that those years are before the pandemic, 16, 17, 18, 19. Then the pandemic breaks everything. Things change. And one of the big changes that we've seen is advent of work from home. So those folks who may have been hesitant who were working in, say, downtown Toronto, who may have been hesitant to move to a Stratford or move to a Brantford or Tillsonburg or so on, go, I don't want to do that commute every day. Well, if they're only going to the office 2 days a week, 1 day a week, or they're fully virtual, that looks a heck of a lot more attractive. And this is the pattern that we see in the data, right? That there's always been a migration out of downtown Toronto at a certain age, right? Between people in their late 20s and early 30s, there's always been this out-migration. But that out-migration has gone from, okay, I'm going to move from downtown Toronto to North York to I'm going to move from downtown Toronto to Tillsonburg or Stratford or a place like that. That's much farther, not in what we would normally consider commuting distance. And the people who leave, it's again, people in the late 20s up to about the age of 38, and children under the age of 5. And in some years, in fact, if we look at Toronto, City of Toronto, York Region, and Peel Region, the most common age on net to move out of the City of Toronto is 0. It's kids under 12 months. So that's what's going on. And we've seen in recent years 100,000 people each year on net, so it considers people moving in one direction to another, moving out of the City of Toronto and Peel Region and York Region to other parts of the province. So this is dramatically changing the face of smaller communities all across Ontario. All across Ontario. So you get a place like Lucan, just outside of London, it's one of the fastest growing communities in Canada. And we're really seeing here, we are really seeing a change of the face of Ontario, for both good and bad. I think in many ways it's fantastic for smaller communities, right? One of the issues that we've always had in my life, I'm 47 years old, in my lifetime, is keeping rural schools open and keeping small communities, schools in smaller communities open. But now when I drive to an Oxford County, I see some of the schools in Tillsonburg and whatnot. They've got portables now. They've had so many kids move in, and so many families move in and then have kids, that these schools that we couldn't keep open, now they're overflowing. We've had revitalized main streets. You get a lot of young, a lot of young families moving in. It keeps, you're able to keep a lot of those stores open that may have not, been able to survive, because we had so many communities across southern Ontario that had actually been depopulating till 2016. And now we're growing at 1% to 2% a year. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but compound interest, you grow at 2% a year, you're doubling in size every 35 years or so. So it's a massive, massive change. But the biggest thing I would say, on the positive side, is the real benefit for economic development, right? Because you're getting very, highly educated, highly motivated people moving here. And yeah, many of them still work in Toronto, but I can guarantee you they would prefer not to have that commute. They would prefer to work locally, work with their neighbors and people around them, even sometimes for a lower wage. You go, okay, well, if I don't have to go into the office 2 days, if I don't have to drive to Toronto 2 days a week, the amount of time and money that will save me, yeah, I'll work here. I'll work for a local company. Even if I get paid a bit less, the benefit that has in my quality of life just makes me better off. So it's a fantastic opportunity for your Stratfords and your Tillsonburgs and your Lukens, and where my family's comes from, Whalen Corners, which is like 3 farms outside of Lucan. It's fantastic opportunities for these communities, but it's not without challenges. One of the biggest challenges we see is displacement, is gentrification. Because the problem is, if you've got people earning Toronto wages coming into non-Toronto cities, they can bid up the price of real estate if you're not building enough homes. And we see that all across southern Ontario. You can get a real displacement of existing residents, particularly lower income existing residents, because you can see investors buying up homes that had seen better days, renovating them, kicking out the existing tenants, renovating them, and then selling them to a middle-class family from the GTA. We see this all over the place. It's a challenge. We all know that we have, and with that displacement, we're starting to see tent communities in places, in smaller communities that really traditionally, these communities had, like every community, had always had homelessness, but it hadn't been visible, right? Been, people sleeping rough, going from one couch to another, but now you're seeing visible signs of homelessness. And a big one is obviously the effect on infrastructure. Do we have the roads and sewers and things like that? And you're having communities of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people having to make decisions of hundreds of millions of dollars to invest in water treatment plants and those kinds of things. So it is a challenge. But I would say the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity, if we do it correctly, is what does it actually mean culturally for the city? What does it actually mean for the quality of life in a city? Because I think that's what people fear, particularly in smaller communities. They go, I like my community. I don't want it to change. So there are communities across southern Ontario that are grappling with this, trying to sort of figure out, okay, how do we deal with that? How do we recognize that our population is growing, that this outmigration is happening, but still keep the vibe and the feel of the community that we like? I was recently just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Mississippi Mills, Ontario, which is just outside of Ottawa. It's about a half hour from Ottawa, and it's having the same pressures of young middle-class families who are getting kind of priced out of the city of Ottawa, moving to Mississippi Mills. And they did something really interesting. The mayor and some other community groups got together, and they had a meeting that anybody in the town could attend. It was kind of an all-day thing, grappling with this question. Okay, grappling with the question of how can we do these things simultaneously? How can we recognize that we need to grow, but still deal with the fact that people don't really want their communities to change? Like, people live in Stratford because they like Stratford. People live in Mississippi Mills because they like Mississippi Mills. So how can at the same time can you grow but also not change, or at least not change in ways that are seen as harmful? So in this, and again, this happens in communities, these kind of discussions, but I think there are a few things that can help, that can kind of help get community buy-in. And not just get community buy-in, but create the conditions that allow the community to co-create what the future looks like. So there's a few things to do. The first, which is often the toughest, is to get people to sort of recognize that growth is in some cases not an option. The people are going to come, whether or not you want them to. We can't erect a wall and make Ottawa pay for it. That's not going to happen, right? The people are going to come. So then the question is, okay, once you recognize that and go, okay, what do we want to happen? Do we want the people to come to our community, bid up the price of homes and displace the existing residents? Or we go, okay, you know what, this growth is going to happen. How can we manage this growth in a way that is creating the conditions, preserving the town the way that we want? So this community did an interesting thing when they got a bunch of people together, and the first thing that they asked was what do you like about this community? What are the things that make Mississippi Mills Mississippi Mills? What are the things that make Stratford Stratford? Right, and it's a big kind of visioning exercise, and it's one of those things, we've all done it, where you get the Post-it notes and everybody writes things down and you stick them somewhere. And they mention a lot of different things about nature, about Main Street. Every community is going to have a list. And then from that, go, okay, are there ways that growth could actually help us preserve these things? Are there ways that growth could actually enhance these things? So it's like, okay, well, if what we care about is, our Canada Day fireworks, like, okay, let's build on that. Can we make it more of a community event? Can we get some of the newcomers to come here? Kind of encourage them when they move here and say, hey, you should be involved with this. This is a really, this is a community thing. We're looking for volunteers, looking for donations. Can we find this as a way? And if we go, okay, well, what we like is nature. What we like is the trails. It's like, okay, well, can we, when individuals come here, those trails need maintenance. Those trails, volunteers, they need, they need upgrading. Can we, talk to the locals and go, okay, let's see what we can do to actually go to build off of that. So there are things that you can do there, but it starts from identifying what you like at a community level and going, okay, let's think about how growth can actually add to that rather than subtract from it. And then the second layer, you go a layer down, then I think you also have to appeal to people's self-interest. I think there's no way around that. But you can do so in a positive way. So one example is, okay, we think about the need to build more housing, and we kind of assume that housing has to, we're building that housing for the newcomers, right, from the people moving from Ottawa or the GTA or so on. But we could also say, well, wait a second. I know a lot of folks in this community would like to downsize. You're getting a little bit older. Maybe you don't want the two-story house with the basement and you're going up and down the stairs all the time. Ask me, actually, if we're going to build housing, what kind of housing would you like? What kind of housing would be helpful? Are you considering downsizing? Oh, yeah. Is there any current housing in the community you'd like? And like, well, no, not really, because I need, I'm looking for something smaller, 2-bedroom. I still want a backyard, maybe. I don't want stairs. Okay, is there anything in the community like that currently? Well, no. Well, there's an opportunity. So if people start to see that, okay, growth is helpful for them, right? Growth is going to give them that opportunity to downsize, get more appropriate housing. Growth is going to help them, make sure that their kids aren't priced out. I think is incredibly helpful. And then finally, what communities are doing is saying, okay, right now the way that we look at doing planning is very sort of, you get, I don't want to give examples here because it will be sort of contentious, but you'll have a project, the project goes to council and they go, okay, do we like, ask community, do you like it, do you not like it, and 90% will hate it, or at least 90% of the people who take the time to comment will be against it. It's not a good model. What if instead we back it up a little bit and go, okay, well, instead of doing this on a project by project basis, or instead of creating these conditions where we think that the option is growth or no growth, say, no, instead, let's do a visioning exercise that we know we're going to have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 families here in the next 10 years, whatever the number is. Go, okay, if that's the case, where do we want those homes? And present it as a set of trade-offs. Go, okay, well, we could put more, we could put more of that housing in existing neighborhoods. We could upzone neighborhoods. We could do this thing, and it has certain benefits, but it might have some drawbacks around traffic or what have you. Or okay, we could build more on the edge of town. Go, okay, but if you do that, you're going to lose some of that green space you love. If you do that, the downside is you're going to have to build more infrastructure, and your property taxes, may be higher than in the other model. And present it as a series of alternatives. So it's not do we grow versus don't we grow, but what way do we grow in? So that's the message I think I'll leave for you today, that the growth is coming to a lot of communities in Southern Ontario. That growth is largely, not exclusively, but that growth is largely coming from younger families who would like a place to raise kids. And then I think we really need to be thinking about, okay, how can we use that growth, or how can we facilitate that growth to create the kind of climate-friendly, family-friendly, middle-class communities that I think we all want. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much.